Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started, everyone. My name is Hannah Vincent. I am the Public Programs and Community Engagement Manager here at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art. And welcome to tonight's program. We'll be discussing the Westmoreland's newest exhibition, which is, of course, titled Frank Lloyd Wright's Southwestern Pennsylvania. Frank Lloyd Wright Southwestern Pennsylvania is co-organized by the Westmoreland Museum of American Art and Fallingwater, a property entrusted to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. It is also generously supported by the Heinz Endowments, the Hillman Exhibition Fund of the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, and Wendy and David Berensfield. The accompanying exhibition, Toshiko Mori and Frank Lloyd Wright, Dialogue and Details, is organized by Jeremiah William McCarthy, Chief Curator at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art. Support for this exhibition is provided by the Heinz Endowments and the Fine Foundation, with special thanks to the National Academy of Design, Plain Sight, and ECC Italy. The museum also receives important support from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development through an Office of Tourism Marketing to Attract Tourism grant. I'm going to turn it over to Jeremiah William McCarthy, our Chief Curator at the Westmoreland, and he will be moderating the discussion.
Thanks, Anne. Hi, everyone. So I have a lovely group of panelists next to me virtually today. We have Scott Perkins, who's Senior Director of Preservation and Collections at Fallingwater. We have Brian Ironman, who's the founder and principal of Skyline Inc. Animators and Studios. And we have Lou Ironman, who's the Director of Communications at Skyline Inc. So we're all pretty thrilled to have you with us and be talking about this exhibition that we just opened and are only a few days into. So I think it's going to be exciting. So for those of you who've seen the exhibition, you might learn something new. And for those of you who haven't come yet, it'll just be a sort of teaser reel for the experience that you'll have in the gallery. So let me share my screen because we have some visuals for you. And then so the way that we thought we would sort of move through this today is I have the presentation, but because of the limitations of and the need for some pretty extreme hardware to run the program that shows the animations, Brian and I will be sort of switching off with screens as we move through the projects. So we started just with some images of, if you do come to the show, what you might see. So here's the title wall and some images, but maybe while people are looking kind of and thinking about this, Scott and Brian, if you could sort of, this exhibition was so many years in the making, if you could like take us back to the beginning, or we could begin at the beginning about how this all came together and how you two met and just that sort of thing.
Sure, I can start. We were looking for exhibition ideas that really pertain to the relationship between Edgar Kaufman Sr., his family, Frank Lloyd Wright, who was their architect for Fallingwater, and looking also at the unrealized work. We get a lot of questions about other projects that Wright had been commissioned to design by the Kaufmans, but were never realized for various reasons. In 1999, the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh launched an exhibition of drawings, most of which you'll see reproductions of in this exhibition. And that was called Merchant Prince and Master Builder. And it really looked at the relationship, the business relationship and the personal relationship between Kaufman and Wright. And that resulted in a publication, which is still, referenced today as kind of a look at, these unrealized projects. It's really the only place that you could see all of those commissions in one book. But we wanted to take this into the 21st century a little bit. We like the idea of exhibiting drawings by Wright. People are very, fascinated by his style of drawing. the different, perspective views and plans and other kinds of things that he includes in his drawings. But then to put it into a virtual realm, we thought brought it into this century, making him relevant to people today who are working in architecture or studying to work in architecture. And we brought on Brian and Lou to kind of help us bring these projects for Pittsburgh and for Fayette County, Pennsylvania, into reality. So, Brian, chime in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that was kind of one of the most interesting aspects of, where we start off. And where we start off was that end of 2018 or 2019 when we first started discussing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a pandemic, and that kind of changed up the schedule completely because a lot of things became difficult to get a hold of. But the challenge after that was just figuring out which projects had enough information that we could move forward on, and that becomes an aspect of every project you work on, where you're dealing with older drawings, and there's the contacts of who you would talk to about what was meant by this, or how was this to be interpreted. When those avenues start to close off over time, then you have to really kind of figure out, based on the documentation, the stories that are written, the drawings are available, as to what can be actually produced accurately with as little guesswork as possible. And so that really kind of comes down to narrowing down the list of the projects that we would actually produce, which led to these 8 projects. And the exhibit kind of varies from the standpoint of whether we go inside or outside. And it really just has to do with how much information is available for the projects. But the thing about all the drawings in the exhibit, the pencil drawings, the color pencils, the sections, elevations, I mean, they're just gorgeous drawings that, seeing them in person, and studying the details up close. I mean, that's one of the most fabulous things about putting these next to the animations, is to see, these two very different representation methods, 70 years apart, of how things are produced. And my background is producing animations and illustrations for all different types of industries, but primarily architecture. And when I started, it was kind of that transition period where the classic method of illustration was coming to an end, and the new technology was just getting started. So that's one of the things I love about seeing the old versus new put next to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what you're saying, because I joined this project so late and it had been years in the making, but when I first kind of started wrapping my head around it or thinking about it, like, the plans can only take you so far, like, no matter what. And I think that the way that you've been able to achieve because architecture is also an experience, right? Like, it's a way of organizing the world, kind of. And the way that you've been able to show that and kind of show how people might move through things, how buildings relate to site, I think it's sort of opens up this whole new avenue. And then there are little things like this where it's like, Frank Lloyd Wright's like nighttime. The nighttime drawings are so beautiful, like what you were saying before. The drawings are beautiful in general, but the night ones, I think, are just like so spectacular. And to hark to that with something like this. So when people come, you'll see the exhibition is organized by project, and each of the projects contains drawings alongside animations. And for some projects, there are also printed 3D models. And then the kind of experience culminates in this tri-screen, which is much more enveloping. And this is related to the projects for Pittsburgh. And there are also projects related to Fallingwater. but maybe now we can go into some of them and sort of like move our way through the projects.
Sure.
So Scott, could you talk a little bit about this and the plan of how this sort of came about, or thinking about this for the campus and whatnot?
Sure. This is a project known as the Rhododendron Chapel, which Wright designed after receiving a letter from Edgar Kaufman Jr. looking for a design for a kind of peaceful place on the Fallingwater site. This is named after rhododendron, which is the plant species that you'll see, the native plant species around Fallingwater, probably the most prolific around Fallingwater. And the project itself was conceived by Wright, but that was delineated or drawn by his chief draftsman in the Taliesin studio, whose name was Jack Howe. So which is nice in the exhibition is that you'll see the drawing with a little notation in the corner saying drawn by Jack Howe. But this project was meant to be, though it's called a chapel, it wasn't really, I don't think, thought of as a sort of religious or sacred space. It was really a contemplative space. It's designed and organized much like other Frank Lloyd Wright chapels and projects of this size. It has a small area for seating with very traditional kind of church pews inside of it. There's a fireplace, there's lounge seating, but it's all meant to kind of take you to a different kind of transcendental level. I think when you're inside, your eyes automatically go up with this skylight, which features some art glass. There's a lot of patinated copper trim and fascia around this building, and then of course you have the stone, which we've interpreted as a Pottsville sandstone. I want to say that this whole drawing set was probably 5 sheets. And so it was a very small project, but had a lot of information on it for Brian to pull from. So Brian, if you want to chip in and
Oh yeah, I mean,
if there's anything.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that, when we started on any of these projects was, Scott's expertise in projects of similar scope and built around the same time, and what those influences would have been on some of those material selections. So there are certain things you can determine without, having the notations of color and things like that. At the time, the wood texture would have been pulled from context of what was happening out at Fallingwater. Same thing with the floors. We know the score patterns of the floors. And so we can reasonably determine that it's probably going to be the Cherokee red painted floor. We know what the stucco color is going to be. We know what the stone is going to be. And then the copper is pretty clear. So in these particular drawings, there was not a lot of guesswork to be done. The millwork was pretty well defined. The colors in the skylight were roughly colored in. I mean, not with a whole lot of detail, but there were some colored pencil that determined what some of those patterns were. So pretty much everything on this particular project, there was not a lot of guesswork. Even the flowers at the front of the chapel was noted in the drawing. So we had quite a bit to work with, even though there was only 5 sheets. This allowed us to go from interior to exterior, and also to be able to produce the 3D print of this particular project. So very, very comprehensive in just a few drawings. The plenum space on the interior between the glass, the art glass, and the space below. So that's like a conditioned volume. That was pretty well noted, as well as the glass. I think on a lot of these drawings, the biggest challenge was just reading the cursive writing on some of the notes, and we would look at it from all different angles. And I tried using some software online to try to determine what some of that scribble was. But Scott was able to read all of it. I mean, we just said to Scott, and he said, "Nope, that's not what it says. It says this." I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're right. It does say that."
Now I see it.
I'll redo it because I got it wrong. So there's a number of things like that in a number of projects that.
Well, and I'll just step in too and say the sort of downfall of so few drawings for projects like this. I remember working on that roof with you, and the angles didn't really line up and match.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at elevations, we're not looking at, more sort of construction drawings that would show how all these connections are made. So there's some fudging to be done in a lot of these projects to get corners to meet, or to get a specific kind of detail to work.
Yeah.
So the artistic liberty is fallen on Brian's shoulders to sort of get inside of Frank Lloyd Wright's brain for a little bit and figure some of that out. But luckily there's enough projects happening in his career that we can look to others to see how he would have solved some of those problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe Brian, I'll stop sharing, and could you play this one?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you bet.
And I'll say Brian and Lou came out to Fallingwater 2, if not 3 times, to walk the grounds, get a sense of the landscape, the different trees and plants, flower species that are about the site. So most of the nature that you see in especially the Fallingwater related projects are pretty true to the site today.
You all hear the audio?
We can, yes.
Did we do our disclaimer about video speed playback?
Oh no, we should. So because of the nature of streaming, you might see some slight glitches in this that when you come to the exhibition or not, will be present. The play is very smooth and seamless. Thank you, Lou, for our behind the curtain, like Wizard of Oz moment. It's also been so nice and relaxing to hear birds in the gallery the past couple of days. would have been such a beautiful structure. Was something chosen instead, Scott, or was it just this project was never realized?
It was just never realized. Lillian Kaufman dies in 1952, and I think that kind of disrupts the plan for it. But it's too bad. There's sort of this overarching question for the exhibition is what if these had been built? How would have it affected the site today as a public site? This was designed at a time when the Kaufmans, this was still private property for them. And especially with the bigger city projects, it's more a question of, what would the city look like had these been built? But this is another really great project that, brings into question the reason for a gate lodge. And this is even in the 1930s. This was a commission project from 37, but the drawings all date to 1941. And if we look at the floor plans of the drawings, you can see there's kind of an arrangement for a caretaker type, inhabitant family. I think it's a 2-bedroom apartment. And then attached to that are rooms for either staff or maybe visiting staff. And then, the typical kind of carport, tool shed types of things. And so the father, Edgar Kaufman Sr., commissions this first gate lodge in 1937. There's a second one 15 years later from Edgar Kaufman Jr. And you can see the shift in Wright's kind of design style shifting from something that was a little bit more close to Fallingwater in its material and its form, and then getting into these later Usonian style buildings. He called these Usonian automatics because of the sort of modular brick units that were used to construct them. But this then grew into sort of 3 cube, houses. They're cube-shaped houses with 2 levels, bedrooms upstairs and living space downstairs. And then each of them was connected by a pathway that would go through gardens. So this is a big statement. Certainly would have changed the approach to Fallingwater. Both of the gatehouses were tended to kind of be the point of entry to the site. At present, we have an entrance right at the highway, so you're entering straight from the highway into the property. These would be further down into the site and closer to where the house is located, but it allowed this barrier gate, this security gate, essentially to be opened from Fallingwater's kitchen or from either one of these 2 gate lodges. But the second of the gate lodges that Edgar Kaufman Jr. commissioned is more planned. There's actually 2 revisions made to this. And because of that, there's more drawings. They're getting into details as far as interiors, furnishings. So again, these are a little bit more planned out and fleshed out as far as what they had intended, but then, again, not realized. So we are not sure why, but, of course, 1956 is a busy time for Frank Lloyd Wright. He's working on the construction of the Guggenheim Museum. He's working on the construction of Price Tower in Oklahoma. There's a lot of activity going on. And it's also the last 3 years of his life. So even if this project had been put on hold for a couple of years, chances are Wright would not have lived to see it built.
Also, I think this is a good time to mention, if you come to see the exhibition at the Westmoreland, you'll see the animations that Skyline has done related to the city of Pittsburgh, and then 2 projects related to the Fallingwater campus. But in order to see all 4 projects related to Fallingwater, you also would want to go and see the companion exhibition that's on view at Fallingwater in the gallery that has 2 additional videos, which are pretty wonderful. And so something I would love to know, like Brian and Lou, as you think about, so now we're showing you a historical photo of 1947 and the point, and then thinking about all of these projects that come start to think about transforming Pittsburgh and specifically related or kind of around the point. and the Civic Center and the things that people will see on view. But could you kind of like walk us through the process of just or even let people know like the enormous amount of research that goes into kind of like translating something from 2D into a 3D animation, because it starts to imply all these other things like the other side of the river and the cars that would populate the streets and the street signs and the clocks. And so how did you like navigate that process?
Well, we visited and spent about a week in Pittsburgh, and spent a good chunk of time at the Heinz History Center, and we also met with Scott, I'm forgetting his name.
Charles Sukup at the City Archives.
Yeah. And so we just reviewed photographs and publications to look for indicators of what the streetscapes looked like, what the cars looked like. I mean, at one point, Brian was showing me something with cars in it, and I said, well, the colored cars seems like something that might be, something wealthier people would have had, but would everyday working people in Pittsburgh have, so would downtown be filled with all the different colors of cars? And he said, oh, I have a photograph, and showed me. And sure enough, really, this was typical. I don't know why I always thought of old cars being mostly black. So maybe it's more the Model Ford kind of thing. But anyway, we looked through photographs, we walked the sites, we took photographs of the existing buildings that still date back to the 1950, 1951 time period. And, there's a lot of back and forth in reviewing photographs and websites and articles to determine, which buildings were really there and which ones weren't. And, for the background, for the context. And all of this came into play when we decided that the setting should be older. Initially, we were just looking at the renderings of the original renderings of the Civic Center, and we were just blown away by how impressive these structures were. And we weren't really thinking about the scale of the context. And, in order to pull back and have that grand view, you have to include a lot of other things around it, or isolate it in a way that is a little bit less user-friendly. So we ended up, when we decided to take it back to the 1950s, that decision made it even more labor-intensive, because there are all kinds of tools to use, scans to populate the 3D background, if you're doing it in modern times. But there's no way to do that for the 1950s. So every one of those buildings had to be created by Brian's hand.
Well, I think for a lot of it, there was a drawing that Charles had shared with us, which was from Penn Pilot, I think, and historic Pittsburgh, and some other drawings that they went back to 1926, I think, or 1923. And there was one particular drawing that called out the height, the number of stories for every building at that particular time. So that became a process of as quickly as possible modeling 1,500 buildings on the Golden Triangle, as well as some of the surrounding areas that average 10 to 12 foot per floor, some more or less. And so it just becomes quickly extruding boxes with the proper number of floors, and then going back layer after layer after layer, adding windows they're as close as possible, to create the illusion of density. There's a lot of procedural tools out there that you could create a made-up city. But when you're doing something specific, you can't really utilize those types of utilities. So you just got to do it manually. And then it gets down into the artistry of adding, rooftop units elevator, elevator towers, vents, all the things, water towers, all the things that you would see to create that illusion. So we try to get as close as possible with the base. And then after that, we start to use artistry to create the noise of the city, the visual noise, which is required. And the thing is you can continue to take it further and further and further and go down that rabbit hole, but then you never finish. So at some point you just have to stop and say it's. I mean, I look at this image and I see so many things I want to do to further enhance the realism, but at some point, just being two people working on it, you gotta say enough and say maybe you'll revisit it down the road, but gotta get the exhibit on the screen. So
I have a mentor who said one time, an exhibition is just where you are with the material at that time. And I feel like that is a very liberating thing to like a credo to kind of live by, where it's like, because you could always keep curating, you can always keep making, you could always keep working on the checklist, and it's sort of just like, no, at a certain point it's like, okay, it's going on the wall, it's all going up.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. There are so many aspects of this project that when you're producing this much content, because I mean there is so many things in this, like this particular project, that I modeled. Like all of those little offices, those interiors are all done.
Wow.
The inside of the convention hall is done.
Maybe also though, for like, okay, so for people who have no context of this structure and like the enormity of this structure, could you walk us through just spatially a little bit of like what people are seeing with the sort of composition of these like structures? And then maybe, because I know after this it comes like some wireframe images, so then maybe you could walk people through that.
Okay, yeah, so let's start on the left side, which is the aquarium. And the one thing that we did not get completed, but eventually we will, is the water features. So the water features, you could say, oh, they were off on this particular day. But in the center of that structure, the aquarium, the round building, there's a fountain, and it is filled with water, and that water is pouring off the side. In the animation, you can see it's running all the way down the wall down by the river. And that is the wading pool and the swimming pools for the public to come swim in the river. There are people that are swimming in the river in the rendering. So along the edge, there's plants and there's fountains that flow off the edge of the roof down into the water. Inside of that building, there's 3 large aquariums, big tanks, and they're called sea monsters. They're inside those tanks. Now, there's fish and sharks and all kinds of things sketched in there that probably wouldn't live very long inside that size of a container. But from an illustrative standpoint, it does the job. And there's the largest. It's an enormous restaurant, an enormous bar that I think it's got several hundred seats at the bar. It might be something approaching 1,000 seats, I want to say.
Is it in the aquarium building?
It's in the aquarium building, and that's another thing that we didn't show in the animation. There's just so much in there. There's parking garages down underneath the aquarium. So if you move to the right, the tower is the golden suns, and the very top is supposed to be representative of a sun. And there's offices and things like that inside that tower. And then as you go to the block that connects the tower to the large helix. That is all city offices. And then same thing in the wing down below that. You can kind of see there's a low office building that connects to the bridge. That is also offices, and that was a requirement of Kaufman in the city that that city offices would be able to be contained within this building. So you can't see it in this particular view, but down between those two office buildings, there is an amphitheater that holds 15,000, I think.
So like in that triangular space?
Yeah, down that triangular space. Yeah.
Can you see my mouth?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
kind of a bandstand.
Yeah. Yeah. And then beyond that, just above your mouse in that little gap, that's the zoo. So there's a
Yeah.
zoo back in that space. So inside the helix, this is probably one of the most complex models that I've built. I built a lot of models over 24 years. And the reason being, of course, it's a helix. And it's not only a helix, but it's a tapered helix, which makes it even more challenging. Along that helix, there are parking lots on the inside of that building. So if you consider that helix as a driveway, a road that goes all the way around the perimeter, if you were to drive that helix at 10 miles an hour, it'd take you 30 minutes to get to the top. But there's the fast ramp over on the very far right-hand side. That's the fast ramp, so you don't have to necessarily do that. But if you consider the interior volume of that helix as completely open, except for these enormous domes that are inside the building. And these domes, there's 3 of them down on the ground floor, and they're, you know, probably several, 100 feet high, 120 feet high. And then on the center of those, there's another dome that sits on the very top. And that's the convention center. Then if you take another dome and you invert that dome and put it on top of that dome, you have the sports arena, which is the very top of the building. And that's where in one of the illustrations you can see, all the seating, the green grass field and all that. The first 3 domes comprise of an opera, a movie theater, and then a planetarium. And then there was another. No, I think that's the 3. And then on top of that, there's the convention center. Now the entire building is supposed to feel like kind of like a carnival-like experience. So the rooftop, which is also a garden, has these 3 brown columns, the big pilasters that come up that support the entire building on the inside. Those are those are moorings for blimps. So you could fly in on your blimp, and you could hook up to the mooring, and you could get down onto the grassy field. That grassy field down on top of the building where you see all the trees is also the helicopter landing area. So if you were to fly in, that's where you'd land. Now the entire experience of car and pedestrian was to feel like a choreographed dance between vehicle and person. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but I know there was not a lot of striping for the parking lots and things like that. And if you look at the renderings, cars are just kind of everywhere, and people are just kind of everywhere. So it was kind of this very active environment that you had seen all kinds of movement: fountains, waterfalls, cars, people, blimps, helicopters, and it would have dominated downtown Pittsburgh from the standpoint of being the central element. So Scott, I'll let you fill in all the rest. That's what I know, just from having worked on it.
Well, I would say let's look at the video. Maybe then we can
Oh, sure, yeah.
That is there sound with this one? I can't remember.
Should we show the tri-screen version of it?
Let's show the tri-screen.
Okay.
So the video that we'll see now will also have two additional Pittsburgh projects. One is a apartment tower on top of Mount Washington, which looks down upon the Civic Center we just saw, and then the second is a parking garage a few blocks away from this that connects to Kaufman's department store. So this is another spiral building designed around the time that Wright's thinking about spiral buildings, especially the Guggenheim. But this video will show you all three of them relating to each other, none of them ever built.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
The music is done by Daniel May, and it's just oh, go ahead.
Let's say who's with the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild Jazz program here in Pittsburgh, for those of you that are familiar with that.
Oh, and we should say too, this is a tri-screen that's flattened now. So when you see it in the exhibition, it's sort of this all-encompassing view, but there's an effect that you'll witness as you look at it through this one.
Yeah, it's
so
rendered,
that people know that.
Yeah, it's rendered through 3 different cameras. The cameras are bent outward, but when you stand at the theater, it wraps around you. So this is kind of the unwrapped version.
For someone also who's relatively new here, it was nice that you started with one of the most iconic Pittsburgh things, like the incline.
Right.
Yeah. There you go.
I mean, I know you'll get tired of me saying this, but there's such a beautiful like synergy between the music and the vistas that you create within the, I mean, it's just really, really extraordinary.
Awesome. Yeah, it was the music is just when I first heard that music from Daniel, it was just like, wow, I'm so lucky to get an opportunity to put some visuals to it. So
And the music comes in at the end.
yeah.
You probably thought 3,000 hours of design time on this one particular animation.
Yeah.
But Daniel essentially got the wireframe version of the animation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He that's all he had to work with is just a very rough wireframe. That's what he had to work with right there.
Yeah.
And just use his imagination as to what you know what would it feel like, and I mean it's just, yeah, the animation is a lot of times, you have this misconception that, on a project that, it's the animation and then the music is you know kind of accompanies the
Right.
but it's not that way. I mean, it really isn't. In many cases, you can have the music without the animation.
Mhm.
But you can't have the animation without the music. So his work is just incredible. I could listen to that just nonstop. It's just
Well, and
oh, what were you gonna say, Scott?
I was going to say this is happening in the 1940s. It's definitely post World War II, but it's at a time when the Pittsburgh Renaissance is starting, the Allegheny Conference is beginning, and the city is thinking about itself. It's thinking about traffic and thinking about housing and thinking about all sorts of things, air quality. And I think what's great about the Wright designs for Pittsburgh especially is that it sort of captures that idea of what a new democracy and new vision for progress is. Part of this exhibition, really was developed from an exhibition that was held at Kaufman's department store in 1946. It was the 75th anniversary of the department store, and they created an exhibition called Pittsburgh in Progress. And part of it was to look forward 75 years to envision what their city would look like in the future, which happened to be the year 2021. So in our minds in 2019, we thought of pushing this exhibition out in 2021 and having this great dialogue about what 1940s Pittsburghers thought the city would look like versus what it actually did in 2021. The pandemic kind of pushed our calendar back a little bit, but I think the themes and the questions are still there. And for the music, it falls into that kind of Aaron Copland Americana, vision of hope and change. And I think that's where all three of these kind of come together: the animation, Wright's design, and the music.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
To me, there's definitely a sense of wonder in all of those aspects, and it's interesting how the music and the visuals bring that to life, and they just kind of draw you into that feeling of wow, what could have been, what would this have been like. And it's interesting to think about Frank Lloyd Wright designing in that space. I think maybe he spent more time in that headspace than most of us do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's this sort of strange, like, future nostalgia thing happening where we're like looking at a rendering that's into the future, but our past, and this really interesting conflation of all these things. And it's and I loved like the addition in the parking garage of like duck and cover, and these little nods to the time period, and this sort of how there's just this uncanny specter of like the time and what's happening with all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the reasons why, I put that on there. Was I had a limited choice, one from the National Archives, and that was one. Oh, I got to put this on there. That's pretty iconic for the early 1950s and the things that were happening. But this image here that you have on the screen was a heartburn moment for me, and this was a pretty good example of the challenges of going through the drawings and the different iterations and all that. And you can see on this image that I was working from a version of the sections and the elevations that showed the entire building was glassed in. So you can see the glass frames and everything. That was in the section drawings, the elevations, and some of the sketches. But the plans, which I had to go by because those were the dimension drawings, was another version. And I didn't see that until I'd spent all that time glassing in the building, only to realize that he had changed it. And now it was a completely open air structure where, in order to get into the domes, you would drive your car into that helix and park it on the inside of the helix. And then you would walk through glass doors that were next to or adjacent to the particular dome you were going into. So when I see the window frames on that, I that was one of those things that at very late hour, I had to start backing things out and starting to park cars on the inside of the building and all that. But it's a very minor visual difference. But a lot of the projects had those little discoveries through the process that design iterations aren't necessarily as obvious as you would think, but the implication is substantial for how the entire building works. So
and there's things happening here that we kind of take for granted almost today, of having green roofs and having plantings on tall buildings, and Wright's kind of plopping it in there just to say nature is still part of this architecture, and nature working together even in tall, big urban structures is possible.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting because someone asked, the point design is so counter to Wright's Fallingwater design. It seems like it was designed in spite of the rivers, instead of using and working with nature's beauty of the rivers and vistas. This design seems to be meant to stay inside and not to look at the rivers. Do you see it the same way?
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you have the boundary of the river here.
Yeah.
Or two rivers, I should say, creating that point of land. And at Fallingwater, the house kind of soars over the water and over the waterfall.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because he's not an architect that, I don't want to say cookie cutter architect, but I think he's designing for the client, and the client at Fallingwater was a family of 3, and the client here was a city of Pittsburghers. So it's a different program, but I get that interpretation of having to work around national boundaries. I mean, he's spanning them, so he's sort of teasing the fact that you can drive over the water.
Yeah.
I think also the whole thing, and this is very much like of the time too, like the thing is almost like a chapel to the automobile.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely.
And this idea that like at this time, the point is like a graveyard of warehouses and train tracks. And so they're thinking like, how do we bring back like some of that productive density that defines a city.
Mhm.
And like Frank Lloyd Wright is like the architect of the suburbs, not of the city in a way. And it's sort of like the car is the thing that creates this link between this density, whereas other people would say like, oh, you know, create like a mixed use space that has like, you know, live work things, or, you know, these sort of denser kind of medieval mixed use cities. It's this interesting thing where it's like he's trying to somehow like create this lure to get people back into the city, in the center of the city, but like temporarily, you know what I mean? They don't
Right.
they have to go back out. And
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that is not included that in this project that would change the definition to a mega structure is living space. There is no residential as part of this project, but everything else is. I mean, you have the zoo, the aquarium, you have every kind of entertainment venue, you know, necessary, you know, parking for, you know, almost the entire city.
every car on the road, basically.
Every car in the road. I forget what the number was as far as the population, but it was like a third or a quarter of the population of Pittsburgh could fit inside this building at any one time. So it was an enormous structure. I think there was the historic forts and things like that that were part of the point are just completely disregarded in this drawing or in this plan. That those aren't saved at all. It just completely steamrolls over that. But so this image is kind of an interesting aspect. This is kind of the development model as far as, you know, going from the wireframe to you know, all the triangles, the little pyramids. That's how the software represents the trees. You can see the train cars are little pyramids, and then we render it with test lighting. So this is the grayscale image. You can see where we start to place the clouds in the sky for shadow casting, and you know, kind of framing in the shot to drown out the foreground, keep that a little bit darker, and to focus the lighting on the subject matter. And then we go into the full color test, which is where we're, you know, applying all the colors, materials, and reflections. There's a number of different plates that comprise of that third image. And then finally we place the backgrounds, render out the skies, and then piece it all together. So that's a 6K image. So width wise, you know, it's an IMAX, little, in some cases larger than IMAX, but not on height. It's more for a wraparound kind of image. Anyways, things like moving objects, which we really didn't get to explore too much in this, and I would love to be able to go through and, you know, put all the animated cars and things like that, and we might do that at some point. You know, those items are then added as a additional layer on top of those images. So,
and just to give people a sense, like, so for the video that we just watched, like something that's 12 minutes, like how many, like about how many cells does that comprise? Like what kind of time are you talking, like, to create and then time to render out? Like, could you just like unpack a little bit?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Sort of like the human labor element is for people, just because we see the beautiful thing and then we hear it with a beautiful score and we just get to benefit from it. But what goes into it?
Well, for this project, the Civic Center really ate up most of the two things that ate up most of the time was the Pittsburgh model and the Civic Center model. So all of those Pittsburgh projects you saw are basically in one virtual world. So when I fly around and create cameras, I have to create the movie set basically. And the movie set comprises of those three buildings plus all the surrounding context that becomes part of that. And anytime you set a camera, basically what I'll do is I'll set a camera and I very early on, and I'll just dream and wish that I had all of that content. And then as I develop the model, I'll start deciding whether that's a feasible shot or not, based on the amount of time that I've got to fill in context. So from there, I just start modeling roads. I start modeling, masses for buildings. I keep developing the site further and further and further until I get to that grayscale image, which is what you see there, which is the bulk of the 3D content. Everything beyond that is very low resolution LiDAR scan of what is out there currently, because at that resolution, I don't really, we're not going to see, whether a building is 1950s or 2023. But so really it just comes down to a starting point of starting to model roads, starting to model sidewalks, and then filling in buildings that match up to those perimeter geometries. And then you start coloring, and then you start adding cars, telephone poles. And what I do is I create libraries. So all of those train cars, each track that has a train car, I just draw a line. And then I tell that line to fill that in with random train cars that are in my library and space them out to create a little gap in between them. So I do shortcuts like that. All of the trees that you see, I basically draw a region in 3D space and I say, fill that in with trees. The same thing with cars on the street. I'll create a library of cars and I will just move them around and say, auto generate a random color for that car. I don't go through and paint, every single car. I let the computer do a lot of that. This is all CPU based. For those of you who know the difference between CPU and GPU, I'll just say this is CPU based. So we built a special render farm to generate all 81,000 frames. That's how many basically renderings comprised of this this animation. And so 81,000 frames, and you piece them all together. There's a center frame, there's a left frame, and a right frame. And on that top image, you can kind of see that split down the side. Yeah, that's right there. So there are some methods you can use to create a wraparound image and render all at once, but I don't really do that. And so basically we start piecing it all together, and then finally you take it into post and you put in the sun flares, the reflections, the lens distortions and things like that to create your final image. So it goes from, I would say, probably about 3 or 4 terabytes of data once we generate all the models. There's probably, in any one of those scenes, there's probably, I would say 1 million trees. There's probably 10,000 buildings, probably 2 million windows. We try to let the computer generate as much as that we can. But one thing that I have heard a lot over the past few weeks is AI, as far as AI being used in 3D. That's not really that's not really a thing.
Not a
I mean,
thing.
it might be one day, but down the road, AI is not very smart yet. And
You can tell that that's become part of the typical vernacular of people trying to say this is something really digitally cool, and they just throw AI in there with CG and 3D and
yeah, that it doesn't work that way yet. Now there is an image in downtown Pittsburgh where there's in the scene where there's like a lot of weird text all over something. And I thought it was really funny, and I left it in there just because That was an AI generated graphic. I needed something for the back wall of,
This?
yeah, there it is. So I needed the back wall for for the pharmacy. So I told AI to generate an image of something with perfume and
This we're talking about.
medication and all that kind of stuff. You can see it tried to spell perfume, but it didn't really know what it was doing. The other thing is like a lot of buildings, like the building right behind on that image, right behind the parking garage, it's kind of the tall, darker gray building. Yeah, that one. So AI had a really hard time helping me identify that building and what the function was. That's the Pittsburgher. And so I was testing it, and it would just get the address completely wrong. And when I would point out that the address was wrong, AI would apologize and say, "Oh, I'm sorry." After, yeah, it is this address. Like, no, it's not that. Never mind. I'll do my own research. So, anyways, there was that aspect. In that same image, though, the graphic over on the left-hand side, that was AI generated, and I asked it to produce a 1950s graphic for fashion to use as a back wall, and that's what it created, and that did a pretty good job. But that's about the limits of what we were able to use, like Stable Diffusion or DALL-E or anything like that. The rest of it is, someone's got to click and make all of those window frames. And so you just got to get in there and brute force, get in there and produce it yourself. You could try to create shortcuts, but by the time you created that shortcut, you might as well have just done it. So that's where we are, I think, for the next 5 years, maybe. So
I think
after that, once it can do that, I'm out of a job. So
I think we have time maybe for like one more video. So could we show, I love this snow scene one. And then for those who go to the Westmoreland, you won't be able to see this one. This one is at Fallingwater. So maybe could we show?
Yeah, absolutely.
This was a farm cottage also designed in 1941, and the Kaufmans had a dairy farm of Jersey cattle on the property and from 1941 till the early 1950s, I think. And so this was a cottage that they commissioned Wright to design for the person that would have been the caretaker of that dairy farm. And a nice little bit of trivia about the dairy farm is that the milk that those cows produced was sold to the Hagen ice cream company in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. And the Hagen ice cream company was owned by Ian and Bernadine Hagen, who later commissioned Kentuck Knob from Frank Lloyd Wright, just a few miles away from Fallingwater.
So a lot of the content in this, actually, Scott, is the exact same content I used 13 years ago in the Shin Khan project for Berskoff. So I basically transferred some of those elements, the snow, the same texture, but the content, the geometry itself, everything is all new for this exhibit, obviously. So
I mean, the decision to set that on a snowy day, it's just like
Mhm.
chef's kiss, absolute chef's kiss. So good,
Snow scenes are my favorite. So
so good. We have an interesting question. It's kind of like a content question that someone says, it strikes me that there seems to be a right transition to repetition and pattern in a way that his earlier modern structures didn't seem to have. The triangles in the chapel, the repeated squares in all the other renderings. Can you address this tendency toward pattern?
I'd probably be one for Scott.
It's kind of, I mean,
it-
it exists throughout the
it-
work, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is kind of a repetitive pattern in the 30s and 40s when he starts building the Usonian houses, and you see
Yeah.
those cutout wood perforated clear story windows. You see, here's a great photo here of the rendering of Kaufman's office inside the department store, and it is a sort of triangle story there. I think it's probably, comes more with Wright's interest in geometry. He was always doing something with the geometric, kind of scheme. All the arc glass windows were based on a kind of abstract geometry of nature patterns and things. But yeah, this is a good one to look at too. It's there's a lot of texture there. You've got the layers of the wood strips and slats, but then you have the graining of the wood also giving you some kind of decorative element to it. The wood grains are turned at angles to catch the light differently.
I mean, I even think like of the patterning at the Guggenheim of the circles on the
Mhm.
floor, balanced by the triangular lights through the stairwell, like almost in so many of the projects, and maybe it stems from like an interest in materiality or something, or I don't know, but there's always this
Yeah.
like interplay between patterns and modular or
Right.
repetition.
If you go back one slide to that, this is a great screen grab here of the animation, because you see that triangular light fixture, which is flush to the ceiling. The reflection of it on the ceiling, on the polished wood of the ceiling, gives you a double triangle that is sort of a nice bonus.
Mhm.
From a technical standpoint, the triangles and the squares are so much easier to model than the helixes.
Sure. Yeah.
There's something really, really terrifying about the idea of a perfect circle.
Yeah, this was another one that was based on the 3060. This was very similar to Price Tower.
Price Tower, and then when you look at the elevation of it, I also see the Romeo and Juliet windmill at Taliesin, which has got a very sharp point to it that breaks the wind as it brushes across the windmill.
Yeah.
Again, these are the building blocks. These are the Froebel blocks that Wright claims were so important to him as a child, and he could still feel them in his hands when he was, an older architect. But it's all about those simple geometric forms just keep getting repeated and repeated and put into different combinations.
I think when you compare this apartment building to the style of apartment that's being built today, I mean, what an extraordinary difference. I mean, these plans are just so luxurious as far as all the amenities you could possibly want. You get the entire floor. You have these amazing views. You have multiple patios and plants and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
As compared to what you see, the same style of apartment building that's, as we drove from Pittsburgh all the way back to Oklahoma City, it's the same. You couldn't determine whether one was particular to a certain city or design or style or whatever.
This also, when looking at the tri-screen, when you show the point view residences, this is the part 2 where the juxtaposition between this structure and like the pitched roof houses immediately next to it that you sort of populated the whole space with.
Yeah.
It really, because I think, and even someone said, like in the comment field, they were like, I'm ready to move in or rent a unit. And there's something very contemporary, like about wanting just the spacing and wanting access to a patio and an outdoor space. And Frank Lloyd Wright being, the start of almost an open plan, like open concept living.
Yeah.
And there's something very contemporary about it. And then in the video, this juxtaposition of this structure, and on the other side of this, the pitched roof homes that are right next to it. You have to like recalibrate and just remember, oh yeah, 1953, because this looks so much more contemporary compared to what's really happening in the 50s.
Yeah.
It's my thought is always, what are those neighbors thinking when this is going up?
Yeah.
What's happening? How high is it going to be?
Yeah.
It really is, growing out of the ground, literally.
Yeah. And nobody really lost a view if this was built, because there wasn't, there would have been trees on that site prior, which the trees would have blocked the view for the houses across the street anyways.
It's interesting.
And there wasn't anything on that site prior. But yeah, so I don't know that it would have caused anybody any problems other than you can see into everybody else's backyards.
Well, and it's interesting to think about the privacy perspective, because each one of those floors gives you a private space more so than the individual houses of that time, because the individual houses were so close together.
Now, down in the basement of this project, you still had all the servants' quarters, which would have been typical for, out at Fallingwater and all that. There's a whole floor just dedicated to the servants that work in the building.
Mm.
And I think it was probably about 10 living units down there, each with their own bathrooms and showers and all that, kitchens.
Oh, so they were almost basically like selling a lifestyle with
two-level garage. There's a basement, boilers, and all of that. So,
well, we've reached our time, but I just want to say, on behalf of everyone here, Brian and Lou, like, thank you so much for like affording us this possibility of even being able to take it so much farther than the plans, being able to, think through so many of the ideas that are on display in these drawings, but in a way that I don't think anyone could have even imagined. And Scott, like, thank you so much, for stewarding this project from the beginning and just making sure that it happened. So all of you, I think on behalf of everyone who attended this tonight, thank you so much for all the work that you did to realize this project.
Well, it was a real excuse to spend time dabbling in Frank Lloyd Wright's world. So
yeah,
we're always happy for those excuses.
We absolutely love Pennsylvania. We love every opportunity we've had to come out there and visit, and Pennsylvania is very tempting.
Yeah. And please come and see the exhibition. It's on view at the Westmoreland till January 14th and at Fallingwater till the end of December.
So everyone has until middle of January to spend a little time in Frank Lloyd Wright, Southwestern Pennsylvania. So.
Yep. Good.
You can always go visit Fallingwater and then come to the Westmoreland. They're very close by. So day trip.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian, Lou, and Scott again. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your night. Again, please come visit Fallingwater and the Westmoreland to see this beautiful work, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.